All right, welcome back everyone for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at the alternatives flow, which is chapter 6 from the Transurfing book.
Oh, fantastic.
This one's all about how we interact with reality.
Yeah.
Not just reacting to it, but actually navigating through this sea of possibilities that is out there.
I love that.
I think it's going to really challenge how we think about control
Oh, absolutely.
and really make us consider how much power we actually have in shaping our own lives.
It really flips the script on how we typically view reality, you know?
Yeah.
Instead of feeling like we're at the mercy of external forces, it suggests that we actually have a much greater degree of influence than we realize.
Okay, so the chapter starts off by introducing this wild concept called the information field,
Right.
which basically acts as a blueprint for all potential realities. And what I found so fascinating is this idea that our hearts, not our heads, have the strongest connection to this field.
It's like our hearts are receiving intuitive knowledge, you know, a direct line to this universal library of possibilities. But here's where it gets a little tricky.
Okay.
Our logical minds, they struggle to interpret these messages from the heart.
Right.
They come through as feelings, gut instincts, those I just know moments. But our rational brain often dismisses them as being vague or unreliable.
Yeah, that makes total sense. It's like when you meet someone and you instantly get a good or bad vibe. You can't explain it logically,
Right.
but something in your gut is telling you to pay attention.
Exactly. And that disconnect between, you know, our hearts knowing and our minds understanding can lead to some serious internal conflict. The chapter actually outlines 3 common roles that people tend to take in response to this dissonance.
Okay.
The needy, the indignant, and the fighter.
Oh, I'm curious about these roles. What makes them different?
They all represent different ways that we resist the natural flow of the alternative space, which the author refers to as the current of variations.
Ah.
The needy constantly seek external solutions, hoping someone or something will come along and fix their problems for them. They feel powerless against the current, like a little paper boat being tossed about.
Okay.
The indignant, on the other hand, they blame the flow for their misfortunes. They're constantly fighting against it, feeling like life is unfair. It's like they're paddling furiously upstream, exhausting themselves in the process.
Yeah.
And then there's the fighter, who are determined to conquer every obstacle through sheer willpower. They try to overpower the current, but ultimately, you know, they're still swimming against the tide.
So no matter which role we tend to play, we're all essentially creating unnecessary resistance and struggle in our lives.
Precisely. And that's where the concept of going with the flow comes in.
Okay.
But, and this is important, it's not about passively drifting or giving up control. It's about learning to navigate the current with more awareness and intention.
Okay. I'm starting to see where this is going, but how do we actually do that?
Yeah.
How do we shift from being like a struggling swimmer to becoming a skilled surfer who can ride the waves of reality?
That's what we'll delve into in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll explore this fascinating concept of guiding signs and how they can help us navigate the alternatives flow with more grace and ease.
So we talked about the needy, the indignant, the fighter, these different roles that we can fall into when it comes to navigating the alternatives flow. And it seems like no matter which one we identify with, it ultimately leads to some level of struggle.
Absolutely.
So the big question is, how do we break free from those patterns and actually start going with the flow in a way that empowers us?
That's where this concept of guiding signs comes in. It's one of the most intriguing aspects of transurfing, and it completely changes how we view the world around us.
You mentioned this briefly before, but for those who might have missed it,
Sure.
could you explain what exactly are these guiding signs?
Yeah, so essentially they're these subtle indicators from the universe, little nudges that can help us course correct and align with the most favorable path within the alternatives flow.
Okay, so we're not talking about like mystical omens or anything like that.
Not exactly.
Okay.
It's more about paying attention to the subtle signs and synchronicities that are always happening around us, but that we often miss because our minds are so busy filtering and interpreting everything through our pre-existing beliefs and expectations.
So it's like our minds are constantly trying to make sense of the world, but our hearts are picking up on a different kind of information, like a more intuitive, energetic kind of knowing.
Precisely. And the key is to learn how to bridge that gap between the mind and the heart, to start paying attention to those subtle whispers of intuition.
Could you give some examples of what these guiding signs might look like in real life?
They can manifest in countless ways. It might be a chance encounter with someone who gives you exactly the piece of advice you needed to hear. Or it could be a sudden feeling of unease about a decision you're about to make. Even if, logically, everything seems fine.
Okay.
Sometimes it's as simple as overhearing a snippet of conversation that sparks an idea or reminds you of something important.
That reminds me of a time when I was considering taking a new job. On paper, it seemed perfect. More money, more responsibility, all the things I thought I wanted. But something just felt off.
Right.
I kept having this nagging doubt, but I brushed it off as like fear of the unknown. Of course, a few months later, the company went through a massive restructuring, and everyone in my department was laid off. If I had listened to that gut feeling, I could have avoided a lot of stress and uncertainty.
That's a perfect example of how our intuition often knows things that our conscious mind hasn't grasped yet.
Right.
The challenge is to learn to trust those feelings, even when they don't make logical sense.
So it's not about becoming like hypervigilant or paranoid.
Right.
Constantly searching for signs in every little thing, but more about cultivating a sense of like mindful awareness, paying attention to what stands out.
Exactly. And the more we practice this kind of awareness, the easier it becomes to distinguish between those random thoughts and those whispers of intuition that are truly trying to guide us.
Okay, so let's say we're starting to tune into these guiding signs. How do we actually use that information to navigate the alternatives flow more effectively?
Well, first of all, it's important to remember that these signs are not meant to be interpreted as rigid instructions or predictions.
Okay.
They're more like gentle nudges, invitations to explore different possibilities.
So it's not about trying to decode the signs or force them to fit into our pre-existing plans.
Right. It's more about observing them with curiosity, noticing how they make us feel, and allowing them to inform our decisions rather than dictate them. Sometimes a guiding sign might simply be a confirmation that we're on the right track, while other times it might be a gentle nudge to course correct, to consider a different approach.
This is starting to sound a lot like the concept of letting go that you mentioned earlier. How does that tie into navigating the alternatives flow?
It's absolutely essential. One of the biggest obstacles to navigating the flow effectively is our tendency to cling to control.
Okay.
To try to force things to happen according to our own rigid plans. But the more we try to, micromanage every aspect of our lives, the more resistance we create. And the further we stray from that path of least resistance, that the alternatives flow naturally follows.
So it's not about being passive or giving up on our goals, but about recognizing that sometimes the most effortless path unfolds when we surrender the need to control every detail.
Precisely. And this can feel counterintuitive to our logical minds.
Yeah.
But when we let go of that tight grip on how things should be, we open ourselves up to a whole new realm of possibilities that we never could have imagined.
This is all incredibly fascinating, but I'm sure some listeners are wondering how to actually put this into practice in their daily lives.
Yeah.
It all sounds a bit abstract and maybe even a little intimidating.
That's a great point. It's one thing to grasp these concepts intellectually, but it's another thing entirely to actually embody them.
Right.
In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore some practical tips and exercises that can help you integrate the principles of transurfing, including those guiding signs, into your everyday life.
Okay, so we've been talking about this whole idea of navigating the alternatives flow.
Right.
By like tuning into our intuition and those guiding signs the universe seems to be sending our way.
Yeah.
But how do we actually put this into practice without turning into some kind of obsessive sign seeker, constantly second-guessing ourselves?
That's a great question. And it's not about becoming hyper-aware of every little detail or trying to force the universe to bend to our will. It's more about cultivating a sense of relaxed awareness and trust. Think of it like learning to dance with the flow of life rather than constantly trying to lead.
So how do we shift from being the one who's always stepping on their partner's toes to becoming the one who's gliding effortlessly across the dance floor?
One of the most powerful practices the book recommends is something called letting go.
Okay.
And I know that phrase can sound a bit vague and even a little scary, but it's really about surrendering the need to control every outcome and trusting that the universe has your back.
So it's not about giving up on our goals or ambitions.
Right.
but more about releasing that white-knuckle grip on how we think things should unfold.
Exactly. When we try to force things to happen according to our own limited perspective, we often create more resistance and obstacles. But when we let go of that rigid control, we open ourselves up to a whole new realm of possibilities that we never could have orchestrated on our own.
Okay, start to see how this all ties together. But how do we actually practice letting go in a way that feels empowering rather than passive?
The book offers a lot of practical techniques, but here's a simple one to start with.
Okay.
When you're faced with a decision, big or small, pause for a moment and ask yourself, what's the easiest, most effortless way forward? Don't overthink it. Just tune into your gut feeling.
So it's about choosing the path of least resistance, trusting that the universe has already laid out the most efficient course.
Precisely. And if you find yourself getting caught up in worry or doubt, try shifting your focus to what you can control in this moment.
Okay.
Your attitude, your actions, your response to the situation.
That makes sense. It's about focusing on what we can do rather than getting bogged down in what we can't.
Right. Another helpful practice is to cultivate a sense of detached observation.
Okay.
Instead of immediately reacting to situations, try stepping back and watching them unfold as if you were an impartial observer.
So it's like we're creating a little space between ourselves and the drama.
Right.
Allowing ourselves to respond with more clarity and intention.
Exactly. And from that place of detachment, it becomes easier to notice those guiding signs and synchronicities that are always there, but that we often miss when we're caught up in the whirlwind of our own thoughts and emotions.
This all sounds incredibly powerful, but I imagine it takes time and practice to really master these principles.
It definitely does. But the beauty of transurfing is that it's not about achieving some kind of perfect state of effortless flow overnight.
Right.
It's about gradually shifting our perspective.
Yeah.
Becoming more aware of our own patterns and learning to trust the wisdom of the universe.
So it's a journey, not a destination.
Oh, exactly.
And even small shifts in our awareness can make a huge difference in how we experience life.
Absolutely. And the more we practice these principles, the more we start to see the magic that unfolds when we align with the flow of reality.
I think that's a perfect place to wrap things up. If you're feeling inspired to dive deeper into the world of transurfing and learn more about navigating the alternatives flow, I highly recommend checking out the book. It's packed with fascinating insights and practical techniques that can truly transform your experience of reality. And who knows, maybe you'll even start to see those guiding signs popping up everywhere you look. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep riding that wave of reality.